This is Everyday Expertise, and I'm Angela. And I'm here today with Tom Olivier Martin. He is an indie game designer with 14 years of game developer experience, doing everything from quality assurance to level, game, and narrative design. He's worked on both PC and mobile, on flagship titles, and niche indie games. And recently, he's decided to strike out on his own, making small, fun indie games that anyone can enjoy. Welcome.
Thank you.
So how did you get started in game design?
Game design is something that I've kind of always done. The earliest games that I made were pen and paper games that I would play with just one or two of my friends around the dining room table, with rules that I more or less invented on the spot, and mechanics that changed as the game needed. Eventually I graduated to Dungeons and Dragons after my parents bought me my first, player's first D&D campaign, second edition AD&D with THACO and all that fun stuff. And so that gave me sort of a platform to become a dungeon master, to design quests, design dungeons and adventures and lore and background. And so I continued doing that until about, well, I mean, I still do that, but I didn't get into video game design until the mid-2000s. I didn't move to Montreal until 2004, and until then, I didn't know you could really get a job in the game industry. So I got a job at Gameloft, 2005. I started as QA tester, and then eventually worked my way up until 2010 when I started doing level design. I went to the Ubisoft campus, which was a level design course that was 1 year, and that's where I learned the basics of scripting, a lot of really important notions about game design, about how players interact with games, and what you as a designer are responsible for when making a game. And then I went back to Gameloft as a level designer, and then made the jump from level design to narrative design. And so that's sort of how I got my start, really. And once I was doing that, I just couldn't stop doing that. I continued.
So you've been a game designer, you've been a narrative designer, and level and all this stuff.
Yeah.
What are the major differences for you when you're like a narrative designer as opposed to just a game designer?
Narrative design, to me, as opposed to just game design, is you're focused more on the story that you're going to deliver to the players, the story that the player is going to experience. Whereas just pure game design, also focuses on game mechanics, maybe the more technical aspects of like the engines and stuff. Usually when you're doing narrative design, you're also working with game designers or level designers, and your focus has to do more with the lore and the background and the pacing and things like that. But a lot of times, especially when you work independently, you have to wear all the hats, and so narrative design will still encompass all those things game design does, just with more of a focus on delivering the story.
So you've worked on AAA games, you've worked on indie games.
Yeah.
What do you think is the main differences there for you? What stands out?
Well, AAA games, whether mobile, PC, console, you're usually working with massive teams. You're usually working for somebody. If you're working for a bigger company, they have investors, and so they have, certain things, certain milestones that they want to reach. They kind of have an agenda of what they want the end result to be. They're going to follow trends in the industry, and so you're really working for somebody. If you're lucky, you'll be given the space to be creative enough to really, express yourself with your work and do something really memorable. But other times you might not be so lucky, and then you're kind of stuck having to follow the trends, add more of a certain element of a game, turn this into a battle royale because that's what all the good games are now.
Right.
But, maybe that's not what you're interested in. Indie gaming, on the other hand, you can just do what you want. I mean, I say that, but you can do what you want depending more or less on what you can do. You're limited by your skills, you're limited by your resources, you don't have anyone telling you what to do, but you can only do so much. But at least you get to say what you want to say, and you really get to express yourself. You really get to make more of a meaningful contribution to gaming culture, I feel, than if you were to work on, the next Assassin's Creed or whatever.
Right. So from what I've seen, you seem to be a proponent of what you've called branching narrative design.
Oh yeah.
What is that, and why do you favor it?
Well, branching narrative design, there's a lot of different ways that you can sort of deliver that. But it's a way to let the player navigate the story in a way that it feels like their choices matter, that it's not just a story that you're telling them, it's the story that they're telling. It's their story. Even if the choices are very, very limited, if you design them in such a way that they offer enough breadth of scope of different emotional impacts, different motivations, then the players will really sort of feel like the game allows them to express themselves within the confines of what you've done. This is often done a lot easier, a lot better in games that allow emergent narrative, where instead of branching narrative paths, there's just a lot of tools. And then you can, you see this a lot in open world games. Dwarf Fortress is the best example of that. But a lot of other games, a lot of the open world, Minecraft, those there's no branching narrative path, so you can tell your own story. But the difference with those games is that there's no set ending. Whereas when you have a game with varying branching narrative paths, you as the designer can still control the pacing, and so you can have more control over moments of emotional impact, emotional significance, and really tell a memorable story. Even if that story will be more or less the same for everyone can still have a unique experience.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little about your process? Because this show's very much about process.
Oh my God.
So can we talk about your personal process, maybe making one of your indie games from beginning to end?
Yeah.
Like how do you start with your idea? With an idea?
Well, I'll use the real world example of the game that I made in 2015, The Hollow. Because that's sort of what I'm talking about when I talk about branching narrative paths. So some really important things to keep in mind when you do this is first of all, I never judge the player for the different choices. So if I give the player three different choices, there isn't one choice that I think, oh well, this is the right choice and this is the wrong choice, and then punish the player for making the wrong choice.
Right.
That's, I feel like you shouldn't be punishing somebody for making the choice that they've reasoned to be the correct one, especially if you as the designer made that choice available.
Right.
Unless that's what your game's about when you're designing it. If you want to do a right versus wrong game that's specifically about that, then that's fine.
Right.
But in general, for just, general storytelling, you should never judge the player for the choices they've made. Then I try to ask myself, after I've designed a certain number of choices, I'll ask myself, well, what if the player doesn't want to do any of those things? What else could the player do? And then I come up with another choice. But then the danger of doing that is you end up with another branch that leads to more choices. And so, each time you're multiplying the work exponentially. So in the Hollow, the game is split into 3 chapters with a prologue and an epilogue. The prologue was really just about introducing the world and the characters and sort of the tools that the player is going to use to navigate the game, which is just choosing ways to respond to the characters. So there was no real significant choices to be made in the prologue. But then each chapter follows a certain theme and shows or presents a certain challenge that the player has to overcome.
Right.
So every choice has to somehow come back to that theme. So if the choices presented don't necessarily contribute anything meaningful to the theme of that chapter, then there probably won't be any consequences to any of the choices made. But otherwise, I try to make sure it stays consistent for each chapter.
And I suppose you put all these things into sort of design documents?
Yeah. Actually, for the Hollow, the design document is very, very simple. Because that's another thing that I discovered too is just a little bit of content takes a tremendous amount of work. And the Hollow, played through quickly, can take about 30 minutes. You can play through the whole game in 30 minutes if you read quickly, and you don't agonize too much over the choices. But it took a month to make. And so the design document itself is very, very simple. It's just 5 columns for each chapter and the prologue and the epilogue, and then it just shows the main beats. Like it says, okay, here the player encounters a hunter, and then here are the choices he can make, and here's what each choice will have a consequence for.
Right.
And then next beat is, okay, now the player will do this. But between those 2 beats, the player might make more choices, there might be more branches, but they're all going to lead back to the next beat no matter what happens.
Right.
So those choices I actually just make them on the fly as I script the game. So a lot of the times I don't really know what they're going to be before I make them, but I do know what the main beats are going to be. Otherwise, because that sort of on the fly design is more or less how I write, and it's not a great way to write. I mean, it can work for some people, but I find that I get lost very easily because I keep getting more ideas. I keep trying to change things. I add more stuff. I keep finding ways to make it better. But having a game design document, or if you're just writing, having an outline where you decide what the main beats are going to be, and then you stick to those, then you can stray a little bit from that as long as you always come back to those beats.
Yeah.
And then you'll finish, first of all, and you probably finish on time. In case of the Hollow, some content actually had to be cut before I got to it, just because of the amount of time it was taking to do anything.
Yeah.
So design documents, very, very important. And I was working with a team I had an artist and a musician, and so I was careful to make those documents legible, not only to me, but also shareable with them in a way that they could understand clearly what was happening.
So you were doing the sort of the coding as well?
Yeah. I was doing the scripting in Unity, and I was actually using a tool that somebody made in Unity for visual novels, because it's a visual novel kind of game.
Yeah.
And the tool itself was still in development, so I could speak to the developer of it and be like, I need this extra functionality, and he would provide it. So it was pretty cool. It's called Fungus.
Yeah.
And it's free. And as far as I know, he's still developing it, and it's still improved, and I'm probably going to go back to it at some point, because it takes away all of the main coding that you would have to do in Unity to build a visual novel. It boils down to a very simple interface.
Yeah.
So
it's certainly a very beautiful game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. The artist did a phenomenal job. David, I had met him at the Montreal Game Loop conference, the Anti conference.
Yeah.
And we said, hey, let's make a game together. So we did. And he was also in the process of learning the ropes. But already he was very, very professional. He had a background in advertisement at the time, and had never really worked for games, art for games. And so, but he would send me mock-ups, silhouettes of characters. For example, for the game features a lot of satyrs, but each satyr has a different theme to it. Like one of them is very talkative, so he's very cunning, and so he would send me 8 silhouettes and say, okay, which one, sort of pick 3 that fit the theme the best. So then I'd pick 3, and then he would make more versions of those, and then I'd pick the best ones out of those, and then we'd keep going until finally we got something that we both liked. And he also quickly found out how much work it takes to make a game.
Yeah, I imagine.
So for a long time, the game featured, obviously placeholder art, just sort of little sketches he had done before, and the game only has 2 backgrounds because backgrounds are hard hard to make. So there's only 2 backgrounds, but in Unity I was able to change just the tint, and that created a whole new environment. But the very end features no background, but it's appropriate for what it is. The art style, the characters, because he really wanted to have a particular style, and it really fit the sort of fairy tale storybook theme, and he just did a phenomenal job, and people are always telling me how much they like it. He has since continued developing his art, and you can find his stuff online. And it's amazing. Like, if you think the Hollow looks good, you should see what he's doing now. It's my backgrounds, my desktop backgrounds now. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what or who would you say are your major influences in your work? What inspired you?
My biggest inspiration would be Neil Gaiman.
I think I can see that in the Hollow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah. Of course. What? If you're not familiar with Neil's work, he touches on he takes from everything. He takes from life. There's nothing out of his reach, and he wields these tales that are, it's always fantastical. There's always these elements of fantasy, and yet somehow the way they're written, they feel real. You believe that this happened, and that's sort of the magic of what he does. I could go on about him. It was The Sandman by him that I started reading a long time ago, and that really opened my eyes to just writing in general. His writing, the way it touched on everything, the way he portrayed characters. It really just made me realize, it answered a lot of the questions I had about writing, which is like, how am I supposed to write about this kind of person or that kind of person? And, the answer is, well, write about them like they were human, like they're people. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. So Neil Gaiman is one of my main influences. I'm also a fan of H.P. Lovecraft. I love that great unknowable evil. Love that. I read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe because I just like to read his stuff for the writing itself. Just the way he writes is beautiful. So those would be my main influences that off the top of my head.
What are your favorite games? Are there any games that inspire you?
Yes. I really like, I play a lot of Dwarf Fortress. At one time I had just a blog that was just about the games of Dwarf Fortress that I do for the emergent narrative that comes out of that game. I also play a lot of just non-narrative games at all, like League of Legends,
Right.
Overwatch. I mean, there's lore and things in those games, but the experience of playing, you're not moving through a story. You're just doing like a quick battle or whatever. But those games are important to let your mind wander and think of the stories for other games. I just finished Red Dead Redemption 2, which, outside of the main story, has so many built-in mechanics that narratives emerge out of it, and things will scale, one thing after another. I'm a big fan of The Witcher 3. That was another game that it has kind of a linear story. The story will always be the same, but the way you move through it impressed me incredibly, because one thing leads to another in ways that you don't predict. And I mean, it's gorgeous, and the voice acting is great and all that. I'm also a huge fan of The Last of Us. The Last of Us. The second one's not out yet. No. That story is completely linear, but just the way that the pacing of that game is impeccable. It's perfect. It's these moments of intense, desperate action, desperately trying to survive, with these moments of peace and calm, and that sort of post-apocalyptic beauty of a decaying world. So those are the main games in more recent years that have influenced me.
Yeah. So what's something you wish you'd known before you started making games?
Everyone plays games differently. What you as a designer intended is not what the player is going to do.
Right.
So if you design an area and say, well, the player's going to be looking in this direction, so then this is going to happen in the background. You can bet that 90% of the time the player will not be looking in that direction and miss the thing that you did.
Yeah.
And even in cases where the player does what you wanted them to do, their reasons for doing it may not be the same as the reasons why you made that thing available. This was a very eye-opening thing when I talked to people who had played my game and talked about the different choices they made, and they told me why they made these choices. It was so out of left field, so far from what I had intended, that it really made me reconsider sort of the consequences of those choices. Because the game The Hollow is, it's a fairy tale, so the consequences aren't necessarily obvious all the time. But everybody does things for their own reasons. Players will always surprise you. So don't count on knowing what the player is going to do, and don't assume what the player is going to do, because they're not going to do it.
So what would you say is your favorite aspect of making games?
Well, the process itself is a lot of fun. Getting an idea and then actually bringing it to life slowly. There's a moment that it goes from being a horrible mess of broken mechanics to, hey, this actually feels like a game now. This is playable. And then you hate it again for a long time. And then it gets finished and it gets released, and then people play it, and then people share with you the experience of playing it. And that to me is what I love about narrative design, is creating these experiences for people sharing these experiences, these stories that you let them walk into and have them come out with something more than when they came into it. You know, that's what I love about storytelling. And the medium of video games really allows stories to be unique. I mean, whenever you tell a story, it's going to change a little bit. You know, if you tell an oral story in a novel, even novels will change every time you read them, because you'll
notice different things.
Exactly. You'll pick up on words or sentences maybe you missed, and you'll picture things differently, or having understood the themes, you'll realize it's about something else. And but games do this in an even more visceral way, where sometimes you'll replay a game just to make different choices, just to see what will happen, you know. So yeah.
So do you have a least favorite aspect of making games?
Yeah. I mean, it's my least favorite thing about making games is when things are broken and you don't understand why, and it makes no sense, and you try everything and you ask other people and nobody knows, and it breaks everything. But the thing is, those moments usually lead into moments of euphoria when you overcome those moments, when you finally figure out what went wrong and you fix it and then it works. Oh my God, it's worth the anger and the hatred and the resentment and the walking away and anger and the I'd say that's my least favorite.
So how do you fit your work into your daily life? Because it's not all work.
Yeah. No. Good heavens, no. Well, my work is always waiting for me. So I just sit down and do it. You know, I sort
Make a schedule for yourself?
I don't.
No.
But there is a routine that I live around. And so there are certain things that I have to do, certain beats I have to hit. But in between those beats, that's when I can do the work, and that's when I have to do the work.
Right.
And really, it's about kicking my own ass, because a lot of it is just sitting down and doing it. And when I'm in between the points of starting the idea and starting the mechanics and then finishing it, there's that long stretch in between where it doesn't look like you're making any progress. You're writing code, you're writing story, you know, you don't have a result yet, especially when you realize halfway through that you're doing it wrong, and then you gotta start over. So I manage to get to work when I'm able to beat the sort of the gloominess of toiling. You know? Right. But I enjoy scripting. I enjoy learning new things. So I manage. I manage.
How do you deal with when you encounter obstacles or stress?
Well, right now I live in Cape Breton. So whenever I encounter something that seems insurmountable, a good thing to do is just step away for a while. You know, I'll take my dog out for a walk, go through the woods. I'm lucky enough that I can do some physical labor. You know, do some wood cutting and some clearing of the land, and you know, other stuff like that. Just things to keep my body busy while my brain works things out. And then I found that the majority of the time when I get back to it, I'll have figured something out. You know, I'll have that light bulb moment of and it usually works. It's usually a good way to do it. But yeah. That's also one of the advantages of you know, being an indie developer, is I can take those moments when I need them. Whereas when you're working for one of the larger companies, you know, they kind of frown upon you just sort of getting up and walking away for 3 hours and then coming back to continue your work. You know?
Yeah, that would probably be too long a break.
Yeah. But sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes, you know, I'll leave a thing maybe for a couple of days before I get back to it. But then, you know, I'll really be raring to go.
Yeah. And so do you get block?
Block?
You know, like creative block.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You deal with that the same way? Or another coping mechanism or what?
No, it's mostly just walking away and coming back. That's most of my problems. Although not just walking away, but getting your mind to focus on something else for a while. So, I'll watch a movie or something, or I'll play a game I've never played before, or a game that I love. Sometimes that will happen when I'll be developing some game mechanics, and then because of my limited knowledge of scripting, the game mechanic doesn't end up being exactly what I want it to be, and then it sort of snowballs from there and makes it so that the game itself isn't really the game that I was envisioning.
Right.
So in those cases, maybe it's good to just try again, which is not always easy to do, especially when you've been working on it for like weeks and weeks.
All right. I think, we've talked about a lot, but do you have any more advice for people who want to start out in making indie games or making games in general?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest aspects of indie game development is survival. Just staying alive.
Right.
Staying healthy. You hear about all these companies of people just killing themselves with work, trying to get the thing out. So just it's important to find a schedule, find a routine where you're not overworking yourself, and find funding, find a way to pay the bills. That's probably the hardest thing. When you have a day job, even a part-time job, you get home, you're tired, you don't really want to start working again. Some people can do that, but not everybody, and it depends on what your day job is. If you work in the industry, sometimes it's hard to keep working on games when you get home. That was one of the big things that changed for me when I started working in the game industry. When I became a tester, I started playing games differently, and now I just find bugs all the time. But yeah, so look for opportunities, and when they present themselves, take them and try not to squander them. Right now, I'm in a very good position where I can spend a lot of time working on these independent games, and Patreon too is a great way to get some support. I mean, if you can get enough support that you can survive off Patreon, that's amazing. But it shouldn't be your only hope. But yeah, right now I'm in a position where I don't have to rely on Patreon, and I've got enough funds that I can survive for a little while at least. At which point I'm going to have to figure something out. But until then, I'm gonna keep toiling away, and hopefully things will pick up enough that I can keep doing that. That's the dream. Yeah.
So speaking of Patreon, you have 3 games so far, I think, available, like on the page.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the Hollow, My Pet Kingdom, and the Osamulator.
Yes.
Which is actually about another person we've interviewed on this show, Osama Dorias. Yeah. Who is a good friend of both of us, and
love you, Osama.
If you want to know who we're talking about, I do encourage you to see that video. You'll probably find the link at the end the end screen.
Or play my game.
Or play his game, which is a great way to find out about our friend Osama.
What it's like to be his friend, which is
basically.
It's fantastic.
What are you working on now?
Well, now I've got a couple of games that I'm sort of tinkering with. I don't have any major projects that I'm working on, but I've got something called Shining Armor, which is sort of an idea I had for a Lemmings-style game with a medieval twist to it. And it's proving to be really, really hard. So I've put that aside, and right now I'm working on something called Villain's Fortress, which is sort of a tower defense side scroller where you build a dungeon that monsters are trying to get through. Yeah. So it's important to keep it simple, but try to keep it interesting too. But for my next project, I'm actually going to go back to My Pet Kingdom to try to get that on Android. because that's something I haven't done yet. So far, all my games are on itch.io,
Yeah.
which is a great platform for indie. But I don't have anything yet on like an app store or the Google Store, Steam.
Right.
So those are going to be the next steps that I'm going to take. So, we'll see how that goes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, definitely, like, how can people find out more info about you and your work?
The main place to find me is at my Patreon page.
We will have links to everything
Yes,
that he says,
heart.
like, in the description of this video.
Yeah. That's one place to find me. That's where I'll be posting all the updates for all the games I'll be working on. Most of it will be available for everyone, but I mean, obviously, patrons will get preferential treatment. There's also my Twitter account, which I use to update for all the projects I'm working on. That's just at Tom Irony, all one word. That's my main web presence. You can find me on itch.io, and hopefully you'll hear more of me in the future.
Yeah, well, I hope so. So, thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been Everyday Expertise. I'm Angela.
I'm Tom. Bye.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this interview. Be sure to share this video with friends and colleagues who may also enjoy this topic. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment below, or check the description for our social media. See you next time.